I was bullied.
And I was a bully. Brian's stutter was one of the many things that I bullied him over.
I always believed that I didn't have anyone to talk to or share what I was going through.
It's amazing how a sincere, simple apology can change everything.
In us doing this, you know, four decades after the fact, what we say is this might have happened last week, last month, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 4 decades ago. But the thing that doesn't change are the reasons and the motivations why, and the impact that it has on people who are.
And the notion of bullying being a disproportionate abuse of power.
That also doesn't change. Let's have a look at our own story in order to get to this particular subject. I mean, if I share what the impact was on me, and what I believe at the time made me a target. I was not a sportsman. I didn't have a good relationship with a ball. I mean, I couldn't kick, hit, or throw a ball straight. Mind you, I couldn't do anything straight.
And you had a relationship with some balls, I would imagine.
Much later, but not in primary school. But I was musical, I was creative, I was artistic, and that's where I found my safe space. And it was my safe space, being behind the piano and doing things musical or being in the school play. That was the safe space. But when I stepped out of that, I was thin and scrawny and weedy, and you'd never say so now. But I was the textbook. I was the textbook cliche of the frightened, skinny little guy who was an easy target for the school bully.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
If being behind a piano was your safe space,
Yes.
what did your unsafe space look like and feel like?
Well, my unsafe space was also having to speak, because behind a piano, I was able to communicate through music as a means of expression and a means of this is where I'm confident. Whereas, if you had said to me as a kid that one day as an adult I would become a public speaker, and that one day I'd have the confidence to do something like this, I could not have imagined that, because it was really like that. And kids who don't understand difficulties, whether it's a speech, whether it's kids who are hearing impaired. I had somebody in my class right from grade 6 who is who still is hearing impaired, and she became a doctor. But she and I had found a kinship, because I had a speech impediment, she had a hearing impairment. But when kids arrive and they don't understand people who are different and people who have those kind of difficulties, they perceive it as weak, and they see it as something to make fun of. So it was all of that, and the fact that I was in not being a sportsman. I wasn't ever effeminate, but I was gentle and I was slightly camp, and that just made me a target for the classic name calling. And at the time, it was words like morphe and pansy and poof. Now, it's the word homo is used as a derogatory term, or even you'll hear in schools, you'll hear kids say, "Oh, you're so gay," making it demeaning on a kid. So it was all of those things all happening at once. The speech, the speech, the being artistic, the not being a sportsman, all that made me a classic target.
I mean, it's interesting. Just the one thing is, for parents who had kids who they knew were either like a little bit camp or gentle, their children were artistic, or one was bohemian. There were all these like
Bohemian's a word that was never in my orbit.
It's very personal, because I know someone whose stepmother said, "No, he's bohemian," rather than like was her way of telling her friends that her son was gay. But
that's a new one on me. My son, he's bohemian.
But I think for me, the why behind, at that same time frame, while you finding yourself and you seeing these things, all the things you've just spoken about, I say in our presentation that when I was 11, I realized what was going on, why those words, morphe and faggot and all of those words were so triggering to me, because of understanding my own attractions. But I think I knew inside before that. I think so much of my molding myself into what I became was hiding that, even before I understood what that was, even before I had the vocabulary to understand what that was, because it wasn't so much a sexual thing, but it was like maybe there is, I don't know. There was something way before 11.
But, in our talk, which we do, to schools and companies and corporations, you talk about something that is very specific, that is very much at the core of why you constructed a whole persona around yourself, and that is the thing of, you were at a young age, you were conditioned,
Absolutely,
to hide what was going on at home. I was conditioned to hide from home what was going on at school. And I think one of the things that we all have to deal with in different ways in our lives is, and social media is very much the epitome of how we present ourselves to the world. It's what we want them to see, and we hide the things we don't. But you had to do that long before the existence.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but as you say, I was conditioned to hide. Without going into all the details now, my family, there was shame around divorce. And God knows, my parents were divorced, my mom's parents were divorced, my dad's parents were divorced. Long, stable relationships wasn't like, there weren't role models, immediate family role models around that.
But also with that period and that background came a shame around being gay.
Oh, yeah, no, that underlying that. So from the get-go, in terms of the conditioning, we kind of had to pretend that in certain circumstances that you didn't want to mention that it was a stepbrother or a half, and there were all of these these subtle cues that families develop.
Right.
That you don't want to say or do anything that's gonna penetrate this very precarious facade. And so I was conditioned to do that.
Correct.
So then understanding my sexuality and witnessing whether it was homophobic comments at home or on the school grounds or whatever, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be that. I don't want to have that. I don't want to be called that. And then also not always, and not necessarily fitting that bill either, but oh my God, does this mean I'm going to become a hairdresser? And because there wasn't Gareth Thomas playing rugby.
No, and it was a time in which the cliche, and especially in South Africa, where being gay was not a right; it was illegal. So people were closeted, but the obvious ones who were the targets of mocking and bullying were cliches of hairdressers and flight attendants and interior decorators,
Florists.
And I mean, if you want the kind of classic cliche I'm talking about of back then, Robin Williams in The Birdcage is in his flowing bell-bottom pants and his very coiffed hair. That was the image of gay. This that you see now was not the image of gay in South Africa, and
Or anywhere really.
So I did not have this image. I was, like I said, I was creative, and I was, whereas Clinton he blended in with all of the jocks because he played rugby, and he had a certain confidence, and he carried himself with that. So,
although that only came a little bit later, because I remember, and I only remember it in retrospect. I don't even remember at the time. But I remember feeling like there was this whole big wide world, and who was I in it? Like this little no one, nothing type of thing. And so just the thought of having to navigate this big, bad, evil, it wasn't a big, bad, evil world, but I almost felt like apologizing for wanting to just own a little space in it and just feel that I belonged in it. And so I had to say, no, it's okay that it's okay for you to walk with your head held high and be okay with who you are. Even though that's not really what I felt, I forced myself to project that, even though I wasn't feeling it.
Project, it was and in looking at this topic of why people bully, I mean, Clinton was only one person who had bullied me. There were others, but this has been, but with him and I being friends now, with us having been friends now for nearly almost 3 years, it's given me an opportunity to understand what I didn't know then. All I was experiencing was being victimized, not knowing why. I mean, I knew I was a target. As I said, I had listed everything earlier. But it was fascinating to get to understand, once we were adults and had our reconciliation, it was fascinating to understand the layers of context that drove you. And this is just one example of thousands of examples of why people bully, that there is a context, there is a reason. And it's not just about being malicious or about being unkind. It is taught, it is conditioning.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, so I'm suddenly projecting this image of being somewhat secure in my environment, even though it was like an absolute facade. And so the natural extension of that is I see my surroundings. I see David, for example, and I'm like, not realizing that he's also carrying whatever insecurities, whatever reasons behind why he's bullying. You don't see that. I only saw his projection. And one of his things was bullying you. And I'm not saying I remember this specifically, but seeing other bullies and seeing, oh, that's a way to, like, I'll be like that. So you take it to the next level. And so, as we say in the presentation, it's in hindsight, it's 2020. If only I could have realized that what I know now, being Bryan's protector would have been far better for my masculinity and for what I was trying to project than being a bully. But then you don't have that. You don't have that. The
foresight, and so in mentioning David and how you observed him, I mean, so you almost began, or was that begin? But you were a bystander, or perhaps an enabler of his behavior.
I mean, look,
you learned. I mean, you patterned what you did on what he was doing.
I mean, sure. I'd also come from Highlands, where bullying was rampant. So I had witnessed a lot of it, and experienced some of it because at that age, when you're coming from primary school to high school, everyone in grade 7 is bullied to a degree. And you've been from being this big fish in a small pond,
right,
to suddenly being a very small fish in a very big pond.
But also, you'd gone from an all-boys school,
to
a co-ed.
Yeah, and so sure, so seeing, so yeah, I witnessed people bullying you, probably before I did.
Yeah,
and we talk about bystanders and enablers and what have you. And it's a whole topic, and we'll do a whole episode on it. But I think it's important to know that, like back then, a bystander is someone who just witnesses it and doesn't say anything or doesn't do anything, right?
And we would ascertain that a bystander's reasons for not saying anything are more out of concern for their own well-being.
Sure.
That if they report it, or if they let on that it's happened, that they are at risk themselves.
Right. So it's worse than if someone who is a jock, or who has the respect, who's physically big, when that person is either a bystander or an enabler. It's somewhat even worse because there isn't a fear of retribution there. There isn't a fear. There you can actually just man up and step in and say, not okay. Which I kind of wish that was who I was. Like, I wished that I was that person rather than who I was. But I remember an enabler is someone who participates more directly. So if David does something to you or makes fun of you or does something horrible, I laugh. Encouraging David.
Right.
Because he's getting a reaction that is a positive reinforcement for him.
And that, it's interesting in today's world, we see that that's less so amongst boys in schools, but more so amongst the mean girl um, uh, groups, because there always seems to be amongst girls, there's always a queen bee, and there's always those who are her minders and her protectors from any criticism, and who report to her of anybody who is not doing exactly what she wants. So there's a lot of enabling amongst mean girls.
Yeah, and so I think that enabling is it's a form of aiding and abetting the bullying. It's the same as bullying, by and large.
Yeah.
You might not be the aggressor, or you might not be the one who initiates, or you might not be the one who is, exacting the most harm at that moment in time, but you're complicit. There's something you can. It's not that you're just not doing something about it.
You actually are
encouraging
it, and therein lies one of the distinct differences between enabling and bystanding. Bystanders don't actively get involved, but they witness. And there are those bystanders who are very conflicted because it's like, do they report it or do they not? There were people who in recent years have come to me when they, when the whole story of Clinton and I came out, we started talking and we became friends. It's so interesting how a whole bunch of people came out of the woodwork and said to me that they knew what was happening to me. They saw it. And they came to me now in recent years going, I'm sorry I didn't say anything, but I was too afraid. And I can't hold that against them. I can't say to them, well, you should have done something and why didn't you? Because, people's natural instinct is to be self-protective. And
it's interesting because that's a lot better. I had someone come up to me after one of our presentations and say, oh my God, I can't believe that I had no idea. And I was like, come on. I mean, how switched off must you have been to have had no idea? Like, were you like this throughout? Because, I mean, it was so blatant. Like, to me, that's bullshit. Sorry. It's the person who said it. I don't buy it.
What also came out of the woodwork, just as another tangent to that, was when we had gone public with this, was that there were one or two other people who came out and who confronted Clinton and said, and you said that you had bullied them and you don't even remember.
I mean, and some memories have come back. I mean, it's so fascinating how we like the psychological games we play on ourselves. That I had honestly had become this sort of, I don't want to use the wrong word here. I'd become this defender of underdogs, completely oblivious.
Eventually, let's understand. Yeah.
Much, much, much later.
Yes.
But without understanding where it was coming from
Yes.
and what was driving it. But it was like when I first was reminded of you, and then the memories came back about how I treated you. Then increasingly, and then we did the thing, and then I got those communications from people who said that I had bullied them as well. And then I started remembering other people that I bullied, and it was now that I have more of an insight into it, it was such a blatant defense mechanism.
And in hindsight now, having gone through what you've gone through in your realization and your transformation, of losing your identity as a bully and changed your whole behavior, and having gone through this process with me, what if you had anybody who came up to you from that time and said that they experienced you as a bully, what would you say to them now?
Well, I mean, look, first and foremost, I certainly wouldn't deny it, even if I didn't remember it. I wouldn't say, "Oh, I didn't," or "I don't remember that." I would be inclined to first believe them. And there's one incident where that kind of did happen, where someone said that I said things and what have you, and language that doesn't sound like language that I would use, and that just wasn't familiar to me, and I don't remember the person at all. But I wasn't going to say, "Well, you're wrong." I was like, my memory's not as good as it used to be. There's no excuse for that. I can only apologize now, even though I didn't, honestly to God, didn't remember the incident.
Sure.
But I also think, well, I know it's a whole other topic. I won't go into it.
Okay. What I do want to just say on the subject of bystanders and enablers is that bringing it into today's world, we had both as bully and bullied. It was very confrontational, and I remember people in the playground who would be standing around, and it was very much in my face. The issue around social media bullying is that you don't know who the bystanders are. You don't know who the enablers are. It's a lot more sinister. And, when somebody is being bullied on social media, on Instagram, or when they are being excluded on Instagram, you don't know who is privy to the plan of how that person was excluded, and you don't know who is laughing behind your back. You don't know who, and I think that for young people today is so much harder to deal with, because it's the unknown.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, and whether or not one supports it, and I'm not saying that I do, but California, for instance, is trying to ban social media for like at school and things like that, and there are all the free speech issues and all of that, without going into depth of that.
The problem with that is you can banded at school. But that's another point. When we were at school, the bullying ended at 3:00 in the afternoon.
Correct.
Okay, and it didn't necessarily resume until 8 the next morning. With social media, it may be some sort of deterrent to try and prevent social media at school. But I look at that perspective and I go, it's 24 hours.
It is 24 hours. So, and what it also does, and we talk about this in our presentation, is that it also deprives a student who's being bullied and is using social media as a way to connect with other people who are tolerant and who are understanding and empathetic, and have, you know, the access that gives them to different resources.
Correct.
Is also taken away.
Correct.
So you sometimes are throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So this topic, you know, is, I mean, we could...
One which I think we will unpack a lot more in later episodes. I mean, this is just episode 2, and we're already touching on a whole strand of subtopics in and around the why people bully, why they are bullied, what the effects are, what the reasons are, bystanders, enablers. There are so many other off ramps to talk about from that, and we will get to those.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are watching, we want to hear your stories as well. So if you've been a bystander or an enabler, didn't want to get involved for whatever reason, whether it was fear of retribution, whatever it is, communicate with us. We have a website. If you're one of the people who have been an enabler or a bystander, we want to hear your stories. Get in touch with us.
Engage with us on our social media platforms.
Reach out and tell us your stories. And if you need to be anonymous, we'll respect that, and we will hide your identity. But we want to hear your stories, because these are the stories that that are going to drive this conversation.
You know, it was laid out in episode 1, and we're going to remind you guys that this is a dialogue, and the dialogue is not just between us. The intention is that the dialogue starts other dialogues between you guys and other people, and it becomes an ongoing awareness of this topic. So, you know, even if you feel you want to be private and DM us on our social media platforms, go ahead. You know, we'd like to hear from you.
And also, by the way, just in keeping with this episode, if you were a bully and you now have a better grasp and understanding of what motivated that, we'd really like to hear from you.
Sure.
Because there, as we said, there are millions of different stories. Ours is just one. And so those are compelling stories, especially from this episode. One of the other things around the whys of bullying, now sort of wrapping up this episode, you know, I can speak to what I was going through as a kid, this need to hide, this desire to what I thought was protecting myself. But some of the evidence that we've heard from other people, by having done all these presentations that we've done, it could be that And again, and when you start to hear these stories, the empathy for the bully starts to build, because invariably someone who's a bully they could be being bullied at home. And the only way, firstly, it's the only behavior they know because it's so normalized in their home. And it's their way to kind of take it out on someone else. It could be because, some of the causes that we talk about in the presentation, some of the things that happen at home, whether it's financial stress or, and it could be someone who
Divorce, domestic violence, substance abuse, sibling rivalry.
They're all these things.
All those factors.
And in some cases, someone, you opted not to do that, but someone who with a speech impediment, for example, who is angry or unable to express themselves, might take it out in the form of bullying.
Right.
And so they it's there's that, like, that sounds like one of those annoying Instagram affirmation things. So I promise you it's not that. But be kind to someone, because you never know what they're going through.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking of people watching this going, but I've been a victim, and why should I feel any empathy when I've been hurt? And that is a valid point. Because I'm looking back in retrospect, and at the time, would I, even if I'd known what the context was, I was being hurt. And yes, particularly young kids, when they are bullied, it's not only them who wants to feel like the person bullying them has been held accountable, but it often is their parents who want to be seen as protecting them by ensuring that the person who is bullied has their head delivered on a spike. I'm being excessive, but basically what they want is the school to expel and suspend and basically destroy that person's life because they want to protect their child who has been bullied. It's an understandable protective reaction. But at the same time, if you as a parent if your reaction to your child having been bullied is to go, don't worry, darling, pardon me, don't worry, darling, I'm going to make sure that they suffer to the full extent of the law. What are you teaching them about how they react to things for the rest of their life? And it becomes a life lesson. And this is these things about how parents deal with children who are being bullied, we will unpack in a later episode.
I mean, one last thing, I saw this reel, I guess. I think it was on Instagram, where it was it was a guy driving in his car, and he was following his daughter, and she was trudging through like crappy weather. I think it was raining or snowing, one of the two, and carrying her bags and what have you. And he was saying that he knows he's going to get flack from parents for doing this. But the reason why he's making his daughter walk to school is because she got kicked off the bus for bullying. And so he didn't want her to think, oh, I could get away with it, and now daddy's going to take me to school. It was like, no, you're gonna learn the repercussions for your behavior. Now, you could argue that making her walk in 36 degree, I don't know what weather the climate was, cold, rainy weather with her books and heavy is maybe too harsh a punishment. But it's an example of someone who's not just enabling their kids in a way that...
And too many parents do, and again, this is a strand which we'll unpack, but too many parents are in denial that their children might be bullies because they see it as a reflection on their own parenting. But that's a whole separate episode.
Yeah, that really is another episode.
So let's leave it there, and we'll see you in episode 3.
Don't forget to send us your stories based on what you heard in this episode. We really do want to hear from you.
Cool.